very much. Okay. Q&A. Start. Waste any time.
Be about anything or just specifically related to philosophy?
It can be about anything, but I have no hesitation in saying I don't know. So if it's outside my area, but try, and we'll see.
Okay, so I have a case. I brought this to a few Rabbi because I'm trying to see, like, some people have said yes and some people have said no. So there's a student, let's say, case example, a student wants to come and learn in Israel, but he can't come without the vaccine, right? His parents are against him getting the vaccine. You know, his family doesn't want him getting the vaccine. But, like, he could take it and just lie to his parents and say he didn't take it and then come and learn in Israel. What should he do?
And if he took it and told them truthfully that he took it, what would happen?
They'd probably be very, very upset with him.
And for the sake of the recording, the question is if a student wants to come to learn in Israel, and in order to get into Israel, you have to take the vaccine. His parents are very much against his taking the vaccine. Should he take the vaccine and not tell them, lie to them? Should he take the vaccine and tell them and cause a great deal of anger and pain? Or should he just not come and not take the vaccine, I suppose?
Right.
Well, the principle that I think probably everybody who asked agrees to is that honoring your parents, respecting your parents, showing reverence for your parents does not include living your own private life. There is no requirement in Jewish law, as far as I know, your parents tell you to do something which is a matter of living your own private life, that you have to do what they say. You don't have to do that. So, taking the vaccine is a matter of his own private life. Coming and learning the land of Israel is a matter of his own private life. Now, of course, even if there isn't a strict law that tells you that you should or should not do something, you have to be sensitive to the values that are involved. Angering your parents is something which you want to avoid as much as you can. But if something in your private life is going to anger them, if a parent walks into the house of a child, a grown child, married, with children, and says, you ought to have fire escapes out of every room, every window in the house, and he doesn't have to put fire escapes on the windows in his house. It's his decision to make about his family and his house. If the parent said, I think you ought to have tissues available in every room, since people might need to use them, okay, tissues is tissues, big deal. I'll put them out because I don't want to anger. You don't have to. You don't have to according to strict Torah law. But why not? It doesn't cost you anything. It's not going to put a cramp in your lifestyle and monetarily cost next to nothing. So there's no reason not to do it. Now here you're talking about coming and learning Torah in the land of Israel. So the first decision that I would recommend is that he should come. He should definitely come. That's more important than either way of handling the problem with his parents. Second of all, I would ask him how he personally feels about the vaccine. Does he feel that he ought to get the vaccine? Does he feel that there's nothing wrong with it? Or does he feel that he's compromising his health and he's endangering himself? If you feel that he's compromising health and endangering himself, then he needs help. He needs educational help or he needs psychological help. absolutely no evidence whatsoever that the vaccines endanger people's health. And indeed, when people tell you no one knows the long-term effects of the vaccine, you should respond to them, and no one knows the long-term effects of the disease. So, it's sort of 50-50, like not clear that you're going to be in a safe spot if you don't use the vaccine and get the disease. I know my own relatives, some of whom were suffering a year after having COVID with the after effects of COVID. They're still suffering a year later. And no one knows how long that's going to go on. So this idea that you don't know cuts both ways. I also saw a statistic that in the trials, the number of serious post-vaccine reactions was 5 times as big as the normal reaction to an influenza vaccine. 5 times as big! Yeah, because in a normal influenza vaccine, it's 1 in 1,000, and here it's 5 in 1,000. Oh, 5 times as big, but still, 5 in 1,000 probably shouldn't worry you too much. It's 1 in 200, It's not the kind of thing that you change the way you get to the supermarket, because there's a 1 in 200 chance to run over a pothole. So, I think that it's for now, let's assume that he himself at least has no objections to taking the vaccine. Now, it is true that for young people, their chance of having serious effects from a COVID infection are very small. The real serious danger is to older people. So if he says, for me, the vaccine is neutral, or I agree that you should get the vaccine, so then it seems to me he should get the vaccine and come. Then the only question left is, what should he tell his parents? Now, if he comes, then there's no point in lying to his parents, because if his parents watch, the internet, they'll know you can't get in without taking the vaccine. So what should he do? Lie and say, I forged a vaccine certificate so I can get in but not take the vaccine? To me, that's going too far. That's already going too far. I think lying is something that one should be very careful about, even though there are times when it's appropriate to lie, when people should be very, very careful about it. And in this case, if he's going to come to the land of Israel to study, then he's not going to get away with it. Unless they're very foolish or very uninformed, they'll know for sure that in order to get in, you have to be vaccinated. So at that point, I think he has to say to his parents, I love you, I respect you, and I would do everything that I could do to please you, but this is something that I need. This is something that my life needs. I personally am not worried about getting the vaccine, and I personally need to spend time in Israel learning Torah, and that being the case, that is what I'm going to have to do. And I'm sorry that this upsets you, but that's what I need to do. And in doing so, he's following down a path that at least tens of thousands of Baalei Tshuva have followed in the last 40 years. I walked that path myself, and I've counseled many people who have. People who wanted to come to Israel to learn, and their parents said, you've got to get a degree, and you've got to get an advanced degree, you got to get into your profession as quickly as possible, because then you advance more quickly, and so on and so on. And the child said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm sorry, I'm not doing that. And the parents are very disappointed. And that happens. And the only thing you could say to parents like that is, let me ask you, did you do what your parents wanted you to do? Did you always please them in terms of their hopes for you? And if he says yes, he said, well, your grandparents didn't. Because if you go back far enough, you'll come to ancestors, all of whom were strictly religious. Somebody turned the corner and said, no, I'm not doing that. So somebody very, very strongly displeased their parents, and you're living the same way because of what they did, and you're not regretting it. So that's life. Life has in it that fact that children do things that parents don't want them to do. And I know it's painful, and I know it's difficult for you, but this is what my life requires. And that's what I would counsel. Yeah, this is Q&A, so yeah.
Okay, is it worthwhile to say things that are considered tikkun, like tikkun tikkun klali, other things like that, or just learning Torah more with like a tikkun?
Is it worthwhile to say tikkun haklali? I think like many matters of this type, the answer is going to depend on all the other conditions that are involved. First of all, you're saying tikkun haklali, it might be an interesting factor to know why you're doing it, what does it mean, how does it work, what's it for. You say, well, I know some nice people who do it, so I'm going to do it also. That's not wrong. It's not wrong, but it's not very elevated, and it probably doesn't have the kind of impact that it's supposed to have when people know what they're doing and knowing why they're doing it. And a question of what the alternative is. If a person's going to spend every night 45 minutes saying tikkun haklali, I think that's probably exaggerated. Because, especially if you're starting out, especially if you're a beginner, what you invest in standard Talmud Torah is going to be the platform on which you build the rest of your life, and tikkun haklali is not going to be that. Once in a while, to do it, if you have some idea of what it's supposed to accomplish, as part of a spread of Jewish practices, each of which contributes something to the whole picture, yes, there's certainly nothing wrong with it. But I don't think it should be a major commitment. Yeah.
So there's, I don't really know the science behind evolution so well, but there's scientists out there that say that there's modern human bones that they found that are over 50,000 years old. So like, I want to know your thoughts on that and how like we reconcile. How do we view this information that exists, and what are we supposed to do with it? Of course, the Torah, like according to our tradition, it seems that the world is 5,782 years old. So like, how do we reconcile that? What should we do when presented with information that contradicts the Torah? So I just want to know your thoughts.
Okay, well, I'm glad we're scheduled to be here until 11:15. So maybe we can handle all those things. I can't handle all of that tonight. You raised at least 3 or 4 different and important questions. But I'll make two remarks. First of all, let's just talk about the age of humanity. So 5782 goes back to Adam, and certainly before that, we will say that there were no humans. All humans are descendants of Adam. But when we say there were no humans, we're using the word human in our sense, because we're talking. And the first thing you ought to ask is, when we say human, on the one hand, and when those investigators say human, do we mean the same thing? Now, you mentioned bones. Yeah, there are bones that look like bones that human beings today have. So they're similar. But do you mean by human something that has human-style bones? That's what it means to be human? No, we don't mean that. Maybe that's what they mean. And then they'll say that they're humans then because of the bones, because all they care about is bones. And even they don't just care about bones. So what they care about typically is bodily structure and a certain level of intelligence. And when they find tools, and they find weapons, and they find cave paintings, and so forth and so on, together with the bones, for them, that's enough evidence of bodily structure plus intelligence to classify them as human, because that's their definition. Their definition is bodily structure plus intelligence. But that's not our definition. Our definition of humanity is bodily structure, intelligence, morality, and spirituality. After all, the first human was spoken to by God, was given commandments by God, violated one of them, and was punished for so doing. So the qualities of morality and spirituality are built into the text. So a creature which has human-style bones and something like human intelligence, but for which we have no evidence whatsoever of morality and spirituality, is going to be a creature which we will reject classifying as human according to our definition of human. Language is free, and you can define any terms you want. You can use it any way you want. I have no complaint against the way these investigators use the word human, but that means that their statement and our statement aren't in conflict with one another because we're not using the same term, we're not using the same definition. So I guess the next question would be, well, did those creatures from, like with the cave paintings 30,000 years ago, assuming the time scale, I'm not doing that problem at the moment, right? Should we say that they had morality and spirituality or not? Well, the only way in which you could have evidence of morality and spirituality is to have language. From tools and weapons and cave paintings, you do not get good and evil, just and unjust, right and wrong, nor do you get recognizing that the world is under the control of an intelligent agent who's responsible for its existence and the way it runs. You can't get that without language. The oldest linguistic remains that have been found so far are less than 6,000 years old. So you're not going to have, we have no direct evidence whatsoever of the moral and spiritual capacities or incapacities of those creatures. Now, if you are on the wavelength of these investigators and say, well, they do have the bones, don't they? Yes. They do have the intelligence, don't they? Yes. Then for sure they had the other things also because they have the bones and the intelligence. At that point I say, no, I don't have to buy that. I don't have to accept that. You have a continuity principle and you think they're genetically related and you think that they evolve from one another. You have your theory and you're using your theory to then create new facts on the ground. Nothing wrong with that. Just remember what you're doing. You're not using facts to support your theory. You're using your theory to create new facts, which is it's okay. It just doesn't give you any evidence. It doesn't give you any justification. It doesn't give you any credibility. It's just a way of working out the consequences of your theory. So my reaction to the bones and the weapons and the cave paintings and the rest is that according to our definition of human, there is no reason to classify them as human, and therefore they are not a contradiction to what we say when we say humanity is only 57, 82 years old. Okay, is that clear?
I think so. I've also heard or I've read that like different groups of people have a certain amount of DNA that's not human. So like Europeans have a certain percentage of Neanderthal DNA. I don't really know if it's true, but I guess like we're supposed to be very skeptical when reading different things, or how are we supposed to like make sense of it, you know?
Well, we have no commitment as to the kind of DNA that Adam had. For all we know, some of the DNA that he had was identical to the genetic material that you find in Neanderthals. So we don't have to worry about that. We have no commitment on that score. They'll tell you it happened from interbreeding from prior ancestors. That's what they'll tell you, but that's their story. That's the story they tell on the basis of their theory. All they see is that these sequences are the same in the Neanderthal DNA and in the human DNA. That's all you see, right? So it's open to us to say that's the way God created it. God created Adam with sequences which happen to be identical to Neanderthal sequences. Right? Again, that's using the theory to interpret the data and create new facts. Which, again, I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but when you do it, you're not gathering evidence to show your theory is right. You're simply using your theory to fill in the picture the way your theory would tell you to fill in the picture, which is fine, but just doesn't give me any reason to think you're right. Mm-hmm. So that's that. Now, as far as overall dating is concerned, as you said, we are committed to 5782, committed without embarrassment and without any hesitation and without being defensive. So simply, that's the age of the universe. And if someone asks how we deal with events that are dated by scientific dating methods as being older than that, the simple way to deal with it is that those events really took place, and the dating methods as read by those investigators does give you an older date, but that's because they're making an assumption of the uniformity of natural law. That natural law always has been what it is today, and then using natural law, you can use those dating mechanisms and figure out the real age of those items. But that, of course, requires the assumption that things have always been operating the same way, that the laws that we see operating are the laws that always have been. And our picture is that that's not true. That the 6 days of creation are prior to our natural system. The laws that we see operating go back only to the end of the sixth day. They start at the end of the sixth day. Before that, the world was running according to very different laws. I don't say totally different, but very different laws. And that the events that took place during that period of time took place much, much faster than they take place in our natural system. So that what they will say is 1 billion years ago would really be 5782 plus 24 hours, because 1 billion years of their history took place in 24 hours, because the laws of nature that are operating today weren't operating then. The laws then were, or if there were any laws at all, was operating under very, very different principles. So that way, I don't have to deny the history. I just have to deny the cumulative date, because I say that the circumstances weren't operating the same way. I just got an email today from a guy who heard me say this on a recording, and he said, "But isn't the whole method of science to extrapolate? You see what's happening here, and then you say that's the way it's always been happening. And if you're going to tell us we can discard extrapolation, so then you're discarding the whole method of science, and that means the whole method of science becomes invalid, and we have to give up science altogether." And my answer to that is that's an exaggeration. Yes, science does have a built-in assumption of extrapolation. This is what you see is happening here, so we extrapolate and say that that's the way it's always been. But science itself is very cavalier about that assumption. Science is willing to give up that assumption for, I would say, fairly flimsy reasons. In particular, when you have trouble with your theory, when you have trouble with the way you're picturing the world developing, and you say, if I assume Q, I can make it work. All I have to do is assume Q, and then I can solve my problems with no evidence other than it solves the problems, no evidence that Q is correct, and Q destroys your extrapolation. They do it like that. They don't say, but we extrapolated, and it's not the same, and we're putting in a blick and a glitch, and so forth and so on. No. We'll put in the glitch, and we'll put it in, and don't worry about it, because then we can solve our problems, like cosmic inflation. There's no positive evidence for cosmic inflation. It solves certain problems that you have with the standard Big Bang theory. Alan Guth, who thought it up in 1980, became an instant celebrity. It's one of the most widely believed theories in cosmology, but it destroys the extrapolation. You have a smooth process, and then all of a sudden, it jumps by a factor of 10 to the 40. See, it's going like this, and then it goes like that, and then it goes on like that. That's not smooth. That's not the way it was going the whole time. You just stick in the blip, because when you stick in the blip, things work out better. So cosmic inflation is one, and then there was a steady state theory from about 1930 to 1965, which held that new stuff is coming into existence in the universe all the time, continuously, out of nothing. Stuff coming in out of nothing? We never saw that in the laboratory. The idea of the universe as a closed system, constancy of mass energy, that's supposed to be an absolute, factor of science. Yeah, it's absolute until you need it not to be absolute. And when you need something else, you can put it without any observations. No one ever observed this. But because you want your theory to work out in a certain way, you junk the extrapolation. So yeah, extrapolation is part of the method, but it's available to be discarded when you need to smooth out your theories. So that being the case, I think it's not very strictly followed. And if we say that in this particular case, it's not followed, we're not junking science altogether. We're simply saying that this particular extrapolation is a mistake. Okay, that's some thoughts on the subject. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
I think that for sure the yeshiva environment is the best environment to grow in Torah and mitzvot and like reach our best level, but eventually we have to leave yeshiva. So what's the strategy that we have to follow in order to know, first of all, don't lose everything we already earned here, to all the progress that we are making here, and also to keep growing. What should be the follows to step, the steps to follow? So in order to do that.
Yeah, I will keep what you said private. I won't publicize it. To say that you someday have to leave the yeshiva, some people find that very challenging, and they don't want to hear that. But I'm inclined to think you're right. There are exceptions, like 1 in 1,000, but the rest, you're going to leave yeshiva, and you're asking how you can hold onto the progress that you made. What strategies can you use? So the first thing you need to know this and take it into account, is that you will not hold on to everything. It won't happen. You have to be prepared to lose, prepared to go down. Otherwise, if you don't realize that and you start to go down, you're going to feel like a failure. You're going to feel despair. You're going to feel that it wasn't worth it because it didn't get you to where you're supposed to be going. And that's a tragedy because it shouldn't have been a problem in the first place. Just as you said correctly at the outset, the yeshiva is a wonderful environment in which to grow. Other environments are environments in which it's natural to fall, to lose, to become weaker. So that makes the second part of your question even more important. In other words, how do you hold on to as much as you can hold on to? Now, your question is really psychological. I'm not a trained psychologist, but I can give you some suggestions, and you should ask other people. I think this is something which you want to gather information from other people as much as you can. I would say the single most important thing is to be part of a community, not to be alone, not to be isolated. For example, if you're going to go for a graduate degree and you have a chance of going to someplace in rural Iowa or rural Texas versus going, let's say, to the University of Pennsylvania, which has the biggest hill in the whole United States, has a strong Orthodox element in its hill, then go to the University of Pennsylvania, because you have a whole community there. And with today's technology, you can be in touch with people through Zoom. I think that everyone should have a daily learning schedule. Now, it could be a half hour, but every day there should be some time devoted to learning with a chavrusa. Not alone, but with a chavrusa. I want to tell you about some experiments that were done about 50 years ago, which had some very, very interesting results. Imagine you're on a college campus and you see an advertisement from the psychology department. Participate in a learning experiment, and we'll pay you $2 an hour. And so you sign up, and you go into the laboratory, and this is what they tell you. We are experimenting with negative feedback. When people make mistakes, we punish them. We want to see how that affects their learning. We have these people who have studied this material, and we're testing them. And when they make mistakes, we punish them. We'll see how that affects their ability to learn. Now, the punishment is a form of electric shock. And there's a guy in there with the student who's asking him questions, and we're sitting here in the control room, and I'm keeping track of his answers, when they're true, when they're false, and what we do. What we need you to do is just set the dial on the electricity as to how many volts of shock he's going to get. That's it. Okay, so you sit there, and he's answering, and then gets the wrong answer, and the guy says, got that wrong, 25 volts. So you set it 25 volts. That's all you do. Right? $2 an hour, what do you expect? 25 volts. Got that one wrong? 50 volts. Right? Now, the true, and of course, when you go up, get to 100 volts, he starts yelling. and the fellow says, they all do that. Don't worry about it. That's part of the protocol, part of the routine, and you keep going. Now, the truth is, the guy sitting in the chair in the other room is an actor, and these guys are stooges, and the only person who's being tested here is you. How high will you go? Will you stop at a certain point? On the gauge, it says mild, medium, strong, dangerous, and fatal. How far will you go? The third time in a week he made that mistake, 250. He's yelling, no! Yeah, they told me, 250. Right? Now, this was done at Yale. And what they discovered was that, well, I don't know if I use the word normal for the Yale students. Maybe that's not right. It's oxymoron. But all right, Yale students, young, healthy, red-blooded Americans, will turn the dial. They will turn the dial. Some had nightmares afterwards, but they'll turn the dial. Stanley Milgram was the psychologist who did this experiment. Now, he drew the conclusion that this is how people respond to authority. And he wanted to shed light on the Nazi era, when people did things which would be against their normal consciences, because authority figures told them. What was pointed out afterwards, that Uncle Stanley sort of generalized beyond the confines of the experiment. The only authority he was testing was scientific authority. He was only testing what people will do when scientists tell them to do it. He wasn't testing what bus drivers will tell them, or the governor of the state will tell them, or a surgeon will tell them. He was only doing it with scientific authority. And what you find is that for the sake of scientific authority, people will generally not follow the rules that they normally think are appropriate rules. So when you hear that, you have to realize that what people do is a matter of the circumstances that they're under, and then it's a question of what your circumstances are. That's Milgram's experiment. I'm sorry, I got sidetracked because I think that's a wonderful experiment. I just made a mistake. I got sidetracked. The experiment I wanted to tell you about is a different experiment. You get the advertisement for a psychological experiment, and you come in, and you're sitting there with like 20 people, and the psychologist says, we're testing visual perception, and we're going to ask you very simple questions, and we want to know your answer by show of hands. So he draws a triangle on the board and another triangle, and he says, how many think that the triangle on the right is bigger? How many people think the triangle on the left is bigger? It's questions like that. So you're sitting there, and you look at the board. It's quite clear that the triangle on the right is bigger. Just how many think that the triangle on the right is bigger? You put up your hand. You put up your hand. Nobody else does. How many think that the triangle on the left is bigger? All the other hands go up. Oh my. Oh my. What? Then he does it with a trapezoid, and he does it with stick figures and so on and so on. How many think this was bigger? Your hand goes up. How many think the other one's bigger? All the other hands go up. Now, what happens to people over time is they start voting with the majority. And afterwards, if you ask them, what about that one and that one, which one was bigger? And the person will say, yeah, the one I voted for with the majority was bigger. Right? But if it's not everybody against one, but it's everybody against two, because the other guys are being paid off, right? They're being told to give the wrong answer, right? If it's everybody against two, So when he asks, which one is the one on the right bigger, you and somebody else, the two hands go up. And he says, is the left bigger, everybody else's hand goes up. People will hold out to the end. They won't change. Two can stand against the crowd. One can't. So it's very important that you should be two, not one. I saw this reported in the Jewish Observer. So that means that a regular chavusa, or someone you can talk to, someone you can share with. I was at this course, and this is what they taught, and everybody's nodding their heads. And I'm thinking, no, that's not right. What should I do? How should I feel? You can talk to somebody about it and share with the other person, share your experience with somebody else. That can hold you. Whereas if you're really isolated, then it's very, very difficult to stand against social pressure. So regular learning is very important, and some kind of social connection with like-minded people with whom you can share and talk about what's going on is very, very important. And then you need to ask people about strategies. For example, I'm asked very often, what happens if you have to study evolution because you're becoming a doctor or whatever it is? Now, I say, first of all, go to an authority on Jewish law who can tell you whether it's permissible or not. I can't do that. I'm not trained in Psak Halacha. I don't give answers to what's right and what's wrong. But if you have to do it, here's a suggestion. Learn the whole subject in quotation marks. You know, Darwin said this, and Huxley said that, and Ernst Mayr said that, and just everything's in quotation marks. You're the one who learned what they said. You learned it, and you repeated it with quotation marks. That's all. You don't have to agree. Who cares whether you agree or not? That shouldn't be part of your grade. I know there are some totalitarian teachers who do ask students, what do you think? And why don't you agree? And you have to agree, and so on and so on. They're just beating you up. To them, I would say you could lie. To them, I could say I would lie. They don't care about truth. So why should you care about truth? You don't owe them anything. You don't owe them anything. And you can quote me. So I think that if you have techniques like that available, idea of learning what they say without committing yourself to it, that can help, put a barrier between you and the material, and you can protect yourself against being affected to some extent. Strategies like that, I think, are important. So those are 3 suggestions. You're welcome. Yeah, what else?
So, what exactly is the idea behind Shovavim, and why is it now, during these 6 marshes? What's the significance of them?
I don't know a lot about Shovavim. I do know that it is directed specifically at male failures to control sexual responses. And it's a time of introspection, a time of special attachment to learning. Some, for example, Hasidic groups like Slonim and others have what they call chamesh shos. Chamesh shos means 5 hours, where you learn for 5 hours with absolutely no distractions. Absolutely no distractions. If someone addresses you, something that had nothing to do with the learning, you don't answer. And that's a job. The normal length of time in yeshiva, a learning period during the day, is 4 hours. 5 hours, an extra hour, with absolutely no distraction. And kids as young as 12 do this. I had a grandchild who did 3 periods of 5 hours each in one day. Took off an hour in between each one, and he did it 3 times in one day. So this is to say, I'm reaching for something higher. I'm trying to stretch myself, stretch beyond myself. Now, I want to tell you a story about one of my grandchildren, which shows you, I think, I couldn't say everybody's like it, like he is, but it comes from his parents and it comes from his Hasidus, his Islam al-Chassid. I forget how old he was when this happened, maybe 12, 13. He's sitting there in the base medrash, and he's doing his 5 hours, with everybody else. While he's sitting there, the boy sitting next to him made an extravagant gesture, which knocked off his glasses. His glasses crashed to the floor. He told his father afterwards, I'm in the middle of the 5 hours. Nothing is supposed to be said that's not part of the learning. but I was afraid he would think that he damaged my glasses and he would feel bad. So I decided to break the 5 hours to tell him that the glasses are okay. That's a 13-year-old kid. You think the kid is 5 hours? I'll be able to say it's 5 hours. I'm doing what the adults do, you know? No. The other kid's going to worry. The other kid's going to feel bad. I can't let him feel bad. Let the 5 hours go. That's very mature. That's very mature. So we're talking now not about something that's external and formal and shallow. By the way, you have this with kids who want to fast on Yom Kippur. And then they compare with each other. How long did you last? I made it at 2:30. You only made it to 1:30? Ha! I made it to 2:30. So on and so on. That's not appropriate. The rule that we have is you don't let them fast. You don't let them fast. 2 years before or 1 year before, you let them fast as preparation, because at that time they can appreciate that it's not a pre-adolescent game of strength. It's a holy day, and the holy day has certain requirements to elevate you spiritually, and this is preparation for when you'll do it for the sake of a mitzvah. There's a bunch of subtle things here. I remember asking my Rebbe Zatzal 40 years ago, more. What about children who are so young that they can't stay up for the Friday meal? Now, there are people who Friday afternoon accept Shabbos early, and they have the Friday night meal early. There's nothing legally wrong with that. There's nothing legally wrong. It's perfectly permissible according to Jewish law. But some groups, especially Hasidic groups, don't do it. So we asked the Rebbe, what about these children who won't be up for the meal? And he said, let them know that that's what you do when you're older. When you're older, that's what you do. You know the advertisements only for over 18? You know why they make those advertisements? Because when you get your 18th birthday, you're going to every one of them. 6 times. I'm 18, so now I can do it. I made it to 18. There's nothing deep there. That's just showing off your age, right? You say, yeah, when you're older, next year, the year after, you'll stay up for the meal. Also, you'll be old enough to do that. That gives it a certain importance in the child's mind. So instead of his being there at the age of 4, when he doesn't really understand what's going on anyway, just give him candies to keep him quiet. So anyway, I think there's a lot to be said about that. But that's basically the idea over there. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on quantum computers?
On what?
Quantum computers. You heard of them?
Yes, of course I've heard of quantum computers.
I watched a video where the scientists seem to imply that parallel universes somehow help the computation. I don't know, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Well, there's a lot of loose talk with very impressive sounding terminology. That to me is like people who say, you know what Einstein discovered? Einstein discovered that everything's really energy. Everything's really energy. The table's really energy. Isn't that mystical? Doesn't it sound, very like a secret? But of course, that's not what Einstein discovered. What Einstein discovered is that that mass can be converted into energy, and energy can be converted into mass. It goes both ways. That's why they talk now today about mass energy. They don't talk about mass or energy. They talk about a thing which expresses itself sometimes as mass, so there's energy, and you can go both directions. So parallel universes. There's something that happens in the world where a thing isn't in a definite state, or what we call a definite state. It has only a probability of being in various different states, and that probability is a reality that has certain effects. So use the word parallel universes, so there's one. When people talk about the multiverse, there's supposed to be no interaction whatsoever between the different universes. So they're totally disconnected from one another. So that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a certain state of being in our world, which enables certain information to be processed in multiple fashions at once. If you want a rough parallel, digital computers used to be top down, determine it, and now you have what's called parallel processing, where several different kinds of processes are being carried out at the same time. That's not parallel universes. It's just that this piece of machinery can do several jobs at the same time, and then compare the outcomes and make a decision on the basis of the comparison of different outcomes rather than going for a single outcome. So this is the way the universe does it. Our universe enables several different things to be considered and interacted with at the same time. Fine, and it could be much more efficient if you can do, 16 or 32 or 4,000 things at the same time. Then you can certainly get results that you couldn't get if you're doing one thing at a time. So I don't hear it as a philosophical revolution. I don't hear it as a deep mystery. It's no more mysterious than quantum mechanics is generally. It's just using standard quantum mechanical principles to enable you to do some computing. I don't think it invents anything new in terms of that. Quantum mechanics is hard enough to understand, but I don't think it invents anything new.
You mentioned that the multiverse, that the universes would have no interaction with each other.
Yeah.
Why would that be the case? Is it because if they interacted, there would be one universe, or?
Well, I think that's part of it, but I think also is that you want to create a conglomeration of things which you for sure aren't seeing. For example, you want to explain why this universe has the laws it has. Why does this universe have the laws that it has? Now, this universe supposedly has laws that determine how it behaves, right? So one answer is, well, there is something that makes universes with different laws. Each one has different laws. And there's no end to these universes that have different laws. Ours is one of them. So is it surprising that there's one that has exactly these laws? There's one that has exactly any laws you would like. They're all different kinds. So then there's no surprise that we have one that has these laws. Why are we in this one? Because only this one allows for life. The other ones don't allow for life. We're not going to be in that one, we're going to be in this one. So this is a way of overcoming the impression that our universe is special somehow, has some kind of special engineering in it, because it has the particular structure that it does. When you know that there's something that gives rise to universes and things change randomly, then you don't think of it as special anymore. You say, I see this gun was fired and the bullet went through the bullseye on that target. How did that happen? From a considerable distance. The person must have been really a good shot. No, you don't understand. That gun was on a swivel, and it was being blown by the wind randomly, and it was shooting bullets all the time. Thousands of bullets went out. One of them went through the target, and the other ones went up to other places. They say, so there's nothing special about going through the target. There's nobody with good aim. There's just so many of them, and going randomly, that this one got hit, one went there also. It's that kind of expression, but I don't see all the other bullets. I only see the one that went through the target. That's why I have a question. How did this one get through the target when it's such a difficult shot? The answer is because there were thousands of them that you don't see. This is one of them. That's the point of the multiverse, one of the ways it's used against the fine-tuning argument. But the fact is, we don't see any universes that have different laws from our laws. We see the laws that we see. So this has to be about something that's not interacting with us.
I think I've heard floated around certain thinkers a concept of the multiverse where every decision you make creates a new world. And
that's Everett's splitting many universes theory of quantum mechanics. That's in serious trouble. I think that people are not taking that seriously anymore in terms of quantum mechanics. He can't define what probability is, and there are other problems with it as well. So you can look it up on Wikipedia. You can see it right away. But there, that's not the multiverse that they're talking about, because each of those new universes is going to have all the same laws.
Yeah.
Have all the same laws. It's just a question of whether it ended up a spin up or spin down, right? And then the consequences of that particular measurement will go differently. But all the laws are the same. That's not the multiverse they're talking about.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to imagine that there's different versions of us in other universes that made other choices.
Yeah, okay, it's interesting. It's interesting to imagine. Yes, it is interesting to imagine. Remember, it's imagination, and you're okay. Yeah, what's noch? What else is on people's mind? Yeah.
I was just wondering if I can ask the Rabbi about this week's parsha. I think I forget where I read the Rashi probably, but the Yaldos, they weren't needed because the Jewish women, and I remember learning this last year, the Jewish women would give birth themselves, and they were compared to like animals, and I was like, it was a caution in my head, like, how could the Torah or any commentator say that? You know, like that's like a little bit degrading, but like it seems like naturally, you know, an animal gives birth, but like to say a Jewish woman, you know, it doesn't fit in my head. Like, how could it's not derech eretz? I mean, it just doesn't seem comfortable.
Gee, maybe you should take a look. Last week's parsha, Jacob's blessings to his children.
Right
They're all right. There are a lot of animals there, right? So it can't be degrading to compare a person to an animal if Jacob said that about his children, the Shiftei Kah, the tribes of the Jewish people, right? And in Pirkei Avos, it also says you should have the qualities of certain animals, right? So we're not disconnected from nature in that way. The body of a human being is essentially an animal body, though it has a certain spiritual structure that animal bodies don't have. But on the other hand, we do eat and digest. We walk. We have muscles. And
Spiritual.
okay. But then the question is, what was the comparison meant to describe? And by the way, the idea of midwives in the world as a whole, and certainly in the ancient world, was very rare. Women gave birth on their own, didn't have any help giving birth. I remember reading about women who are working in the fields, and they give birth there, and somebody comes and takes the baby, and they continue finishing the day's work, because if you didn't work, you starved. So people worked. And giving birth to a baby didn't slow you down. You just did it. This idea of being in the hospital and going to Beit HaChlama, when I was born, every woman that gave birth spent at least a week in the hospital. Because she gave birth, whoa, that's such a trauma. Who knows what could happen? But in the rest of the world, nothing like that. So the idea of giving birth and without help or advice and so on was not unusual at all. He was hoping that these women who did give help to the Jewish women when it was needed would be able to engineer something for him, and they decided not to cooperate. But I think their remark was that in our culture, the midwife plays a very, very minor role, and the vast majority don't use midwives, and therefore not something that we can control. And in comparison to animals, doesn't have to be taken badly at all. Yeah.
It says in Bereshis that it says he drove the men out and stationed east of the Garden of Eden the cherubim and the fiery ever-turning sword to guard the way to the tree of life. So it sounds like a really deep verse, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on it. What's this fiery ever-turning sword? The hacherev hamishapeches.
Yeah.
You know.
The Midrash, no? Midrash?
Also,
Oh,
I only know one association. I never studied that passage carefully. I know one association. There are certain things which behave in a way that you can't put a specific definition on them. They behave in different ways at different times, and you may not have a range within which to contain them. You have a little bit of this in quantum mechanics, because when you have a particle, you measure it for a particular property, then the measurement gives it the reality of that property. For what you don't measure, it doesn't have that property. It only has a property when you measure it. Before you measure it, it's in a superposition of different possibilities, and that's only resolved by measurement. So if you measure a particular property, at that moment, that particle has a property because you measured it. But in and of itself, it didn't have the property. In and of itself, it was just in a superposition, in a wave function. Here, there's the tree of life, and there has to be something to prevent access. And part of the message here is different circumstances will require different means of prevention. And there isn't going to be one single definition of what the prevention is, so that you could sort of analyze it. Aha, that's the barrier, so let's use cannons. Or let's use acid. Or let's use lasers. Because it isn't going to have a fixed character that you could deal with and try to strategize about how to overcome. It's going to change its character for the circumstances that are necessary to make the protection perfect. That's part of the message. And it's, I think, part of the message of how God runs the world altogether. God is committed to running the world according to certain patterns when we're looking. Odessa says this. When we're not looking, God has no commitment that gravity should work, or that water should boil at 100 degrees centigrade, or that solids should remain solids and not become liquids. And so the patterns are for the sake of our consciousness, our understanding, our decision-making. It's for the sake of the coherence of our lives, but it doesn't serve any other purpose. And there's a symptom of this in the Talmud, which says, blessing, a power that multiplies things, only applies to things that are hidden. Eina bracha mitzuya el v'dover hamis'alim min ha'ayin. Only things that are hidden from the eye. If you measure your crops, that's how much you have. If you don't measure them, you might end up with more because you didn't measure it, and you won't notice the difference. So, somewhere min ha'ayin. That's the word. Something hidden from the eye. So, it means that although God wants us to understand what's going on, therefore He gives us a kind of scenario within which things operate according to rules that we can grasp to a large extent and predict and understand and explain. His management of the world as a whole isn't beholden to us. It isn't formed so that we can grasp it, and that's something which, from our point of view, is something that's beyond our grasp. So that's one of the things that the ever-changing sword, the sword that changes its character, changes its shape, changes its nature, is expressing. But I have not studied that passage in great detail, so I don't know a great deal about it.
So it reinforces the idea that there's no way back in?
Yes, that's right. There certainly is no way back in. But it sort of gives you an idea that how that will be protected. See, He knew where it was. Right? We don't know where it is altogether, where the Garden of Eden is.
Adam knew where
I mean, he was there. Right?
River Euphrates. It was on the top.
That's a big area.
Huh?
That's a big area. What you describe is a big area. So, that's what was protecting it for him. And it's protected from us because we don't know where it is, and there could be other ways of protecting it. And the point is, you're not going to boil it down to a simple definition and say, aha, that's how it's protected, and now we know what the barrier is, and so forth and so on. It's not going to be like that. Protection is going to be hidden from the eye. Okay. Good questions.
Yeah.